Welcome to the Gus Alva Perspective, a video cast that's earmarked at embracing gratitude and abundance over the mindset of fear and scarcity, which affects many individuals. By coming to this video cast, I hope you benefit from the overall sense of advice and inspiration that we hope to create. The theme that we'd like to touch on today is one that is current in the news. We've seen this mass influx of immigrants coming from different countries trying to come into the US. And immigration is one of those topics that has been around forever. If you take into consideration why people immigrate from a different country over to another one, in this case, take the US, it's oftentimes because of a desire for additional opportunities that might not necessarily be in one's country where they were born. But immigration to a new country is peppered with many variables. It's as easy as, taking a look at our country and seeing the desire to distance oneself from persecution, but also to seek out additional opportunities that highlighted the reasons for the pilgrims first setting foot on this particular country, the US. Immigration, however, can present with multiple challenges, which may vary depending on individual circumstances and the country of destination. So it's not just unique to the US. I was having a conversation with someone from Germany, and he was mentioning that they've had a heavy influx from people from, say, the African continent or the Middle East. But common challenges that immigrants oftentimes face can certainly be noted across the globe. And let's touch on some of these because we may run into someone who is a recent immigrant, and it's not a bad idea to be sensitive to some of the issues that folks might be experiencing. The language barrier is probably the most overt thing that is obvious. Adjusting to a new language can be very difficult, particularly if the immigrant is not proficient in the official language of the host country. And so we know that communication barriers can hinder everyday tasks. And this oftentimes will limit people's ability to find employment, but also to access vital services. So language is really critical. We look back at that story in the Bible of the Tower of Babel, and if you can't communicate effectively with someone else, then that's obviously going to create great havoc and confusion. A second thing that's very important is culture shock. I remember when I was going to high school, there were many individuals that were immigrating from Vietnam at that particular point. The war had actually been, coursing through the country, and many individuals were actually refugees that came. They were dubbed boat people because they were clearly being persecuted, and if not necessarily tying into a given doctrine or theme, in this case communism, they would have been killed had they not left their country. But the culture shock that immigrants may experience evokes a feeling of disorientation, frustration, and isolation as people try to navigate unfamiliar traditions and ways of life. And I recall, many of my friends and peers while at school and me asking them about their overall experience, where they were hailing from initially. And that culture shock was a big, big thing for them. I remember also having a conversation with a friend whose parents, left a war-torn area in Europe when Serbia and Croatia were in conflict. Many people were trying to get out of the country because there was a lot of instability, but many people were being kept from being able to exit. And when they were finally able to exit, again, the overall fallout of not only language, but certainly also culture shock was one of those critical things that they had to overcome. Employment and education obviously are very important issues. Finding suitable employment for people that match the qualifications and skill sets that people have had can be very challenging for migrants, for immigrants in particular. Recognition of foreign credentials is oftentimes not necessarily something that is uniform. There's oftentimes a big difference along the lines of the educational backdrop that people have, and differences in professional standards as well as competition for jobs pose significant hurdles for people to actually be able to support themselves appropriately. Accessing education and acquiring new skills might be very complex and require additional certifications. Um, as well as language proficiency, but that's certainly something that can't be overlooked. Another key issue are sort of the administrative and legal burdens that people face navigating an immigration system and understanding the complex legal requirements if one wants to reside legally in a new country, as well as obtaining necessary visas and permits can generally be very complicated, time consuming, and oftentimes immigrants are overcome by facing bureaucratic challenges, lengthy waiting periods and legal obstacles, which oftentimes have people then think of maybe doing things outside of the legal system, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But it's critical that we be aware of some of the different types of challenges that people face. The next thing to consider is social integration. Remember, building social networks is not an easy thing. Making friends, integrating into the local community, being able to assimilate can be very, very, very difficult. Immigrants sometimes face difficulties in establishing social connections. They sometimes deal with prejudice or discrimination. And the feeling of sensing that one belongs in a new society can be an elusive thing. Now, another point to consider are final financial considerations. The immigrant that's having to manage finances, having to access credit or understand even the local economic landscape can be overwhelming. The cost of living disparities or limited job opportunities or a lack of credit history certainly poses financial challenges for people, and it makes them really all of a sudden just feel at a loss. It's also important to take into consideration homesickness and emotional well being. Being separated from one's family or friends or familiar surroundings would be overwhelming to anyone. The feeling of homesickness or feelings of loneliness or isolation can be, very deep. And immigrants oftentimes experience stress, anxiety, and emotional strain because of the challenges of needing to adjust to a new environment. The last 2 points are really critical from a health related issue. Accessing healthcare and social services can be very difficult. Understanding and navigating the healthcare and social welfare systems of the host country can really be complex. Oftentimes, at the present time, there's a lot of rhetoric about inequities, and that's specific to this. So, barriers in accessing healthcare or social support and government assistance programs are sort of a critical link for people that are new to a country. Last point is a sad point, but it's a very real point, and that is discrimination as well as xenophobia. Immigrants oftentimes will encounter discriminatory attitudes or xenophobia and hostility based on their nationality, their ethnicity, or their immigration status. And prejudice and bias can affect people's experiences in multiple aspects of life. Not only includes employment, but also housing and social interaction. So, as we see, it's really important to note that there are multiple challenges that exist for people that are new immigrants to a country. We're seeing at the present time that many people are flocking our borders, and it's critical that we at least have empathy for many of the things that they are experiencing. Ultimately, the reason by which people are seeking out a new place is for enhanced opportunity, which they might lack somewhere else. But it's also critical that people do so in a legal manner and not necessarily be utilized as political pawns or tools for, again, the benefit of other individuals. But we all can make a difference if we run across somebody that's a new immigrant and they're being challenged. Well, we can all take an effective role in helping them out by just having a bit of an understanding of the backdrop associated with the different set of circumstances that they are experiencing at that point in time. With that said, I thank you all very much for joining us on this segment of the Gus Alva Perspective videocast earmarked to embrace gratitude and abundance. Thank you for joining us.